Just after the war, weaving was very, very prosperous in Shetland.
Yeah.
You know, they were weaving for a buyer's market, mainly in America, and things went very well, but that stopped about 1953, I think. To go back to the patriarchal nature of the firm, I remember that when I was born, old Stuart gave me a tweed blanket. You know, again, you know, something that one would not normally expect, you know, the boss of the pinnacle of the firm to have done. But, you know, I think my mother still has that blanket somewhere. You know, weavers are often political too, on the left, and, you know, that fits my dad as well, although, of course, it's not the case with every weaver.
We didn't weave anything on spec, as you would say, except scarves.
Right.
We did scarves in summer, and they were mainly sold to the local tourists from the hotel. The faster, the better you wove, the quicker you wove, the more you got. You were paid by the yard.
Yeah.
At that point. I remember when I started there first in 54, it was a time thing, an hourly rate. It was 2 shillings an hour when I started. And it went up to 2 and 6, and we thought, wow, we're doing well. Eventually they went over to piecework, so much per yard. I forget what the yard rate was.
Yeah.
But I do remember on a couple of occasions managing to weave about 30 yards in a day.
Wow, that's
So I
it.
was doing all right at that point. And then when the weaving sort of tailed off, and I was back on an hourly rate again, of course. That got to be proportionately less and less. And as I said, I ended up 37.5 pence an hour in 1973.
Yeah.
So I said enough is enough.
Yeah.
I mean, Artie Irving, the boss, the big boss over the whole lot, he would wander in the weaving room many times and have a yarn with Johnny Gilbertson and come over and speak to me many a time. I mind that Sam had actually recruited me to the weaving. I can remember Artie Irving coming over here, and that was after I was discharged for the RAF. He came over here and asked me if I'd come and weave for him at Hillswick. And I said, well, you can always give it a go. And they were quite friendly. I mean, there was no... there was
Casual.
yes, very casual.
Well, that's good.
Mind I was telling you about the Antilli heaters that we had
Yeah.
here. And they were really hot. You got too close to them. I find when winter's day we were sitting down having our break about 11 o'clock. That was, yes, Geordie Chipson. He used to sit at the room at the window there just across from me. He was sitting alongside Jimmy Williamson. Jimmy Williamson was, well, he worked mainly in the shop and in the store and things like that. He knit the dough with the
So he
weaving.
would pop in to you guys
He
for a
would
bit
pop
of a
in,
crack.
yes, he would pop in for a break along
Uh-huh.
with us. Him and Geordie Chipson was sitting on a weaving stool turned over on its side that had made a nice little bench for the two of them could sit down. Johnny Gilbertson was always at the head of the table on the one and only chair.
Okay.
Me and maybe me and probably Bobby or somebody was on a weaving stool turned over on the side at the other side of the table.
Okay.
But that was a cold one to stay on while the heaters were going. I mind seeing George Gibson reaching down to this heater. I never paid any attention to what he was doing. And he slowly turned it towards Jimmy Williamson's leg. Jimmy Williamson was totally unaware. He was sitting there wearing thick, heavy corduroy trousers. And Geordie pulled this heater as close up to within a few inches of Jimmy's leg. All of a sudden he should have felt the head permeating through those bricks. And I find He was very short-tempered. He could dish out the tricks, but he couldn't attack it. Shoved it up and he said, "Damned fool, they would have burnt me bricks." That he must have been very hot before it penetrated. That was typical of George Gibson. He was very tricky, so practical jokes.
Did any of the guys like smoke or anything? Smoking?
Yeah, well, everybody
Pipes?
smoked.
And did they go outside to
Not
smoke?
outside. Why would you do that? No, the room was full of smoke.
Is
They knew
that
that.
right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, they were always handing around things to each other. That's one of the things that made me get up.
Oh.
Oh, it was too much.
My father had a load too, but that was a wide one. But they made, no, and again they made white stuff, and then they could make dark stuff in the middle of it too. But that was and they were all most of your neighbours in the war. When they go back to the war, they wouldn't have much to do, and they took up weaving. Struck us like God. I was trying to remember the somebody came and showed us how to do that. You can thread up the loom and that, but maybe it was Johnson, I'm not sure. I can't remember that.
So was there a group of you together at the same time, learning at the same time?
When they built that new shed, there was 8, at least 8, sometimes more. But that's still there. Because as I said, you were never called because you work with the 4 pedals. And you had to work 1 or 2, or maybe you went out and whatever, and then you fired the shuttle, it was a rope, but you had a leather strap in the middle, this way and then back that way, so you were never cold, and they had a telly lamp, of course, then. But sometimes the snow would maybe come in around it was all just stone-built sheds, you see.
I think it was shilling a yard, I think it was.
Shilling, yeah.
And you had to do, well this you had to do 26 pedals to get an inch.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
And the standard cloth was 16
Yeah,
pedals for an inch.
yeah.
So you had 36 times 16 before you got a shilling. and it was the hardest I ever wrote in my working life, really.
Yeah,
You were breaking a sweat by 8:10 in the morning, and you were like that until 5 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah,
5 days a week, and then 12 o'clock on Saturday.
right.
So there are no
Holiday
surplus
Saturday.
fat on you. You were.
Heard that from a couple of people we've chatted with.
Yeah.
The hard work, good exercise as well.
Oh, it was very good exercise.
Yeah.
No nothing but that. But so eventually, when I spoke to him, I got the tweed back and everything, and I was delighted when I spoke to him about how much it was going to cost. Because we tried to get £5 a week for a wage. That was, so we were paid monthly. We are settled up monthly, but we are paid £5 a week
Yeah.
for 3 weeks. And then the last week our income tax and insurance was taken off.
Okay.
You see, so to try and get £5 for the 4th week, you were having to push it really.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, and he says, no, he says, if you give me a piece for a pattern, for one of my patterns, he says, you can have it. Didn't cost me.
Good.
So I was really chuffed about that.
Yeah. Did they produce this again then? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. I can forget what they were charging a sort of a yard.
Yeah.
I forget what that was. 47, 48, 49 started weaving.
Yeah.
After the war, because the firm took over the shop, and that happened in 1946, just after the war. It was a London firm that bought it.
Right.
Called Standing and Company, and I always mind the address, 112 Shetland Street, London. And they bought it, and the directors of that company were called Murphy. And they bought it, and they did a big job on it. They built a new shop and increased the number of people working there. Well, I think when I left to go into the army, I think there was somewhere about 25 people employed on the service. Edward Murphy was his name. And he was the sort of one that had the Tweed part of the firm. That he looked after that, but that was his baby. And he was based in London most of the time, but he would come up and maybe stay a month up in North Bank.
Okay, was he a Londoner?
Londoner,
Right,
oh
okay.
yeah, probably, yeah. And he would come up and stay for probably, different varied, but I mean sometimes he was up for at least a month at the time, yeah.
Wow, okay.
And drive up, and he had a lovely MG sports car.
Wow.
Yeah, drove up in London and come up on the boat from Aberdeen.
Yeah.
And at that time it was a lift on, lift off.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, took the car up and he would always go away with, there's patterns, he always took them back to London. I don't know what he did with them eventually, but he would always take them away in the car with him.